Hi guys, tonight we're travelling back to a world where butter has no wrapper, no label, and absolutely no polite little dish waiting beside the bread. Imagine dusk on a windy grassland, a leather bag swaying against the side of a tired animal, warm milk sloshing inside as hooves press into dust. By morning, something strange has happened. The milk is separated. A pale, soft richness gathers like a secret at the top, and someone, hungry enough to taste almost anything, discovers comfort. Was butter born from genius, accident, or the ancient human talent for noticing dinner where nobody expected it? Probably all three, which is annoyingly sensible, but history often is. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And as you get comfortable, comment where you're listening from and what your local time is right now. Maybe it is midnight, maybe 3 in the afternoon. No judgment from the dairy gods. Now, dim the lights. You stand at the edge of memory, where written records have not yet arrived, and the first herding communities are learning that animals can offer more than meat, hides, bone, and muscle. Around you, the evening air smells of dry grass, smoke from a low fire, and the warm animal scent of cattle, sheep, or goats pressed close together against the chill. You feel grit under your sandals, or perhaps no sandals at all, just the cool ground hardening as the sun sinks. Somewhere nearby, a child coughs softly, a dog turns in a circle and lies down. A clay vessel gives a dull knock as someone sets it beside the hearth. This is not yet the tidy world of farms with fences and calendar pages. It is a slower, rougher world of movement, weather, hunger, and small discoveries. People have begun to manage herds in parts of the ancient Near East and surrounding regions during the Neolithic period, thousands of years before cities rise into stone and brick. Goats and sheep are among the early companions of this change, followed by cattle in many places. Milk is strange at first, because it is meant for young animals, not for full-grown humans trying to look casual, while their stomachs decide whether this was a terrible idea. Many adults cannot easily digest fresh lactose, and that matters. Yet fermentation, souring, and fat separation turn milk into something more forgiving. Yogurt, cheese, butter, ghee, curds. Every one of them is, in a way, a clever conversation with the body. You watch a woman kneel near a skin bag hung from a frame. Her hands are cracked from cold water, ash, grass fibres, and years of doing work that no one writes down. She pours milk into the bag, ties it tight, and leaves it where the motion can do what arms would otherwise have to do. The bag swings when people walk past. It bumps gently as animals are led out. It breathes with the day. Inside, droplets of fat collide, gather, and cling. They are tiny at first, then larger, then stubborn enough to become butter grains. It sounds simple, but simple things are often the most powerful. Fire is simple once you have it. A wheel is obvious after somebody has already invented it. Butter, too, may have arrived with that same infuriating shrug, of course. Shaking cream makes fat collect. Why did nobody tell the rest of us sooner? The mainstream fact is this butter comes from churning milk or cream, until fat globules break free from their delicate membranes and join together. The liquid left behind becomes buttermilk, not the cultured supermarket version you may know, but an older, thinner, tangy liquid that could be drunk, cooked with, or fed to animals. In a world without refrigeration, this was not merely tasty, it was preservation. Fat keeps energy packed tightly. Butter can be eaten quickly, clarified into ghee, mixed into grains, rubbed into skin, used in lamps, or offered to something invisible and powerful. You sense why such food would matter. A small lump, cool and pliant in the hand, carries the effort of pasture, milking, carrying, waiting, shaking, washing, salting if salt is available, and guarding from every creature with a nose. The soundscape is humble, milk splashes softly, leather creaks, flies worry at the edge of the hut. A wooden peg taps against a post. The first butter is not silent luxury. It is damp, smoky, slightly sour, and alive with its surroundings. You breathe in the sharpness of fermented milk mingling with hearth smoke. You feel the animal hide bag, greasy on the outside, flexible and warm from the day. There is no shining kitchen. There is no marble counter. There is only patience, luck, and an extremely practical person who realizes that a floating mass of fat should not be thrown away. Historians still argue whether the earliest butter was made intentionally from cream or discovered by accident during transport, when milk carried in skins or stomach bags was shaken into separation. The trouble is that butter itself almost never survives for archaeologists to admire. It melts, spoils, soaks into things, and disappears like a very shy witness. What remains are clues dairy fats absorbed into ancient pottery, residues analysed by modern science, bones of domesticated animals, and later images or texts from societies that had already turned dairying into a regular part of life. You are listening, then, not to a single birth certificate for butter, but to a trail of fingerprints. There is a quirky little detail hiding in this deep past. Some researchers believe early containers made from animal stomachs may have helped milk curdle because of natural enzymes, giving ancient people accidental lessons in cheese and other dairy transformations. Imagine discovering that your container is also quietly working as a cook, very helpful, mildly unsettling, and exactly the kind of thing history likes to do. For butter, skin bags and hanging vessels may have played a similar accidental teacher role. Walk enough miles with milk slapping back and forth, and the universe begins making suggestions. You move with a small herding group at first light. The grass is wet against your ankles. The sky's a thin grey bowl. Animals shift and mutter, bells or bone charms clicking faintly if the group uses them. Someone milks a goat, fingers pressing in a steady rhythm, the milk foaming against the side of a vessel. It is warm when you touch the outside. Warmth is important. Too cold, and fat stays stubborn. Too hot, and everything becomes unpleasant in ways no bedtime listener needs described in great detail. The right temperature helps the cream gather, and ancient people, without thermometers, learn by skin, smell, season, and memory. That is one of the most intimate truths of early food history. Before written recipes, knowledge lives in bodies. You know the weight of a bag when it is full. You know the smell of milk that can still be saved. You know the dull thud of butter grains beginning to form. You know when a liquid slosh becomes a thicker, broken sound. You may not explain it with chemistry, but your hands understand. Your grandmother's hands understood. Someone's grandmother before that understood. And she probably gave very firm instructions while pretending not to be proud. At this stage, butter is not universal. In hot regions, clarified butter or other rendered fats may be more stable. In olive-growing lands, oil will become a powerful rival. In northern or highland areas with good pasture and cooler weather, butter makes more practical sense. The food follows the landscape. It belongs to grass, rain, animals, and the kind of climate that does not immediately turn every dairy experiment into a regrettable smell. You feel that geography under your feet. Butter is never just butter. It is weather made edible. It is pasture translated into fat. It is a season you can spread, melt, store, trade, and crave. As the day grows warmer, the work continues. Milk is set aside so cream can rise. Some is allowed to sour slightly. Because cultured cream churns more easily and develops a deeper flavour, that tang is not a flaw. It is a signature. You taste it on the edge of your tongue, bright and grassy, with a faint barnyard honesty that a polite cook might prefer to call rustic. A person gathers the forming butter and presses it, squeezing out buttermilk, rinsing it if clean water is available. Each press changes the texture. Each motion helps the butter last a little longer. There is a soft slap, slap, slap against wood or hide, gentle enough for sleep, but purposeful enough to feed a family. Think of the calories. A herding life asks for walking, lifting, carrying, guarding animals at night, repairing shelters, cutting fodder, and surviving seasons that do not care about anyone's plans. Butter offers dense energy. It can enrich porridge, soften flatbread, glaze roasted grains, or be swallowed in small pieces when other food is scarce. It also marks ownership and skill. To make butter, you need access to milk animals, enough surplus milk to process, tools for churning, and the labour to manage it all. So that little lump in the bowl is not humble in the way it looks. It is a quiet announcement. This household has animals, time, knowledge, and luck. By night, the fire is low and the first stars open above the dark shapes of animals. A small amount of butter rests in a shallow bowl. Pale, cool, faintly sour. You touch it, and it gives like soft wax, spread over coarse grain or a warm, flat cake. It melts at once, slipping into every crack. The herd breathes. Smoke curls upward. The ordinary has turned golden. The room is low, warm, and smoky, built for survival rather than elegance, which is a polite way of saying you may bump your head if you stand up too proudly. The walls are packed earth or mud brick, cool to the touch in the morning and faintly dusty beneath your fingers. A hearth glows in the centre or along one side, its smoke curling toward a hole above, not always successfully, because ancient ventilation seems to have had a very relaxed attitude toward human comfort. You breathe in ash, sour milk, damp wool, and the green scent of fodder stacked nearby. Outside, animals shift in a pen, their hooves clicking softly on hard ground. Inside, the household begins its quiet machinery. You sit close enough to feel heat on your knees. A vessel waits near the hearth, its sides rubbed smooth from use. It may be clay, leather, wood, or a combination of things that modern kitchens would probably file under absolutely not dishwasher safe. Yet these tools are clever. They're shaped by repeated work, not by decoration alone. A wide clay bowl lets cream rest. A skin bag can be hung and rocked. A wooden churn, where wood is available, turns patient motion into food. The household is a workshop, and the workshop smells like smoke, milk, straw, sweat, and a faint tang that tells you the cream has been left to sour just enough. You take the handle of a simple churn. It may be a tall container with a plunger, or perhaps a lidded pot that can be shaken and rolled. There is no clock on the wall. There is only sound. At first, the liquid inside moves freely, sloshing in a loose, watery rhythm. Your hands push and pull, your shoulders warm, your palms grow slick against the handle. The vessel answers with a hollow gulping noise, then a thicker, uneven thumping. Something is changing in the dark. You cannot see it, but you hear it. The cream is losing its smoothness. Fat is gathering into grains. The work becomes slower and more satisfying, as if the churn is finally admitting that yes, something useful is happening. A mainstream historical fact rests in this smoky room. One of the earliest known artistic scenes of organised dairying comes from ancient Mesopotamia, where a carved temple frieze shows cattle being milked and people processing dairy in vessels. The exact product is not labelled, because ancient artists had the nerve to leave future scholars with puzzles instead of neat captions. Still, the image reveals something important. Dairy work was not a vague accident at the edge of life. It could belong to temples, households, labour systems, and skilled routines. Milk had entered the world of planned production. The hands doing this work are rarely named. You feel that silence around you as much as the warmth of the fire. A woman leans over a jar, skimming cream with a shallow spoon. Another person rinses a cloth. A child is told to stop poking the ashes, which is advice children across history receive with limited enthusiasm. Someone checks a row of small vessels set near a wall, each holding milk at a different stage. Fresh, souring, thickened, strained, churned. The room is a calendar made of pots. Nothing is random. Every smell means a point in time. Every texture tells whether the household must hurry or wait. The cream used for butter often benefits from souring. Not rotting, not collapsing into disaster, but fermenting under watchful care. You lift a lid and smell it. The scent is sharp, clean, almost grassy, with a deeper note underneath. When cream ferments, its flavour grows more complex, and in many conditions it churns more readily. You do not need modern laboratory words to know this. You learn because today's cream becomes butter faster than yesterday's did, because one pot behaves better near the hearth, while another does better in a cooler corner, because a vessel used many times seems to carry a helpful invisible life. The household remembers through surfaces. Clay is important here. Touch the pot and you feel tiny ridges left by fingers. Cord or wheel. In some places, porous pottery absorbs traces of fat that sink into the walls, invisible to the eye but not to time. A pot can keep a flavour. A pot can mark a family habit. A pot can hold a history long after the people who used it are gone. It is almost rude how much pottery knows. Humans forget names. Kings boast. Buildings fall. But a humble dairy bowl quietly keeps evidence in its pores. Now the butter arrives. Not as a neat golden block, but as scattered grains floating in buttermilk. You open the churn and peer in. Small lumps cling together, pale and soft, like pieces of cloud that have been persuaded to become lunch. You gather them with wet hands. They are cool despite the warm room, slippery at first, then firmer as you press them. Buttermilk runs between your fingers. The sound is small and intimate, a wet patter into the bowl below. You press, fold, and press again, working out the liquid so the butter will keep longer. Each squeeze matters. Leave too much buttermilk inside, and spoilage creeps in faster, like an uninvited guest who somehow always finds the food. Salt, when available, changes the story. You pinch it between your fingers, rough crystals scraping against skin. Salt sharpens flavour, helps preservation, and gives butter a firm identity in the mouth. But salt is not equally available everywhere, and it can be precious. Some households may keep butter unsalted and use it quickly. Others may clarify it, warming the butter until water evaporates and milk solids separate, leaving a cleaner fat that stores better in warmer climates. In such choices, you can feel geography, trade, wealth, and climate all pressing into one bowl. A quirky little tidbit drifts in from old dairy folklore in many later rural communities. Butter making attracted charms, songs, and suspicions. People sometimes believed that a jealous neighbour, a witch, or a bad glance could stop cream from turning into butter. It sounds dramatic. Yes. But stand here for a while, arms aching, cream stubbornly refusing to change, and you may become slightly more sympathetic. When a process depends on temperature, acidity, cleanliness, animal health, and timing, failure can feel personal. Magic often grows in the gap between effort and explanation. Historians still debate how often early butter was made in ordinary homes compared with larger communal or temple settings, because the tools of dairying can be difficult to identify with certainty. A jar might hold milk, beer, oil, grain, or something that began as one thing and ended as another. A scene carved in stone may show a ritual, a daily task, or an idealized version of work. The evidence whispers rather than speaks. So you pay attention to the ordinary logic, where there are herds, vessels, surplus milk, and people trying to stretch food across seasons. Dairycraft can take root. The atmosphere thickens as the day lengthens. Sunlight enters through a doorway as a pale rectangle full of dust. Flies gather and are waved away with a switch of reeds. The churn is washed. Water is never casual. Clean water takes effort to fetch, and cleanliness, though not understood in modern germ theory, is learned through results. A sour smell that goes wrong, a batch that spoils, a stomach that protests. These are stern teachers. The household develops rules. Use this vessel for milk. Keep that lid covered. Rinse with hot water if the fire allows. Store the butter in a cool place. Do not let the goat lick the spoon, even if the goat feels strongly about the matter. You step outside and feel the change in air. The yard is brighter, edged with dung smoke, crushed herbs, and sun-warming mud walls. A woman carries the finished butter in a small container, maybe to a storage niche, maybe to a neighbour, maybe to someone of higher status who expects a portion. Butter may remain domestic, but it can also become obligation. Food moves along lines of family, rank, debt, offering, and exchange. A lump of butter can represent labour owed, hospitality given, or favour requested. It is soft in the hand, yet socially firm. Back inside, the buttermilk is not wasted. It can be drunk with a grimace or pleasure. Depending on your taste and your childhood training, it can moisten grain, feed pigs or dogs, or become part of another dish. Ancient households are rarely sentimental about waste. Scraps have futures. Liquids have second lives. Even ashes from the hearth can clean, preserve, or fertilise. The dairy room is part of a larger cycle where almost everything is used until it has no argument left. By evening, the butter has cooled. The room is quieter now, the churn leaning against the wall like a tired worker. Your arms remember the rhythm. Push, pull, pause, push, pull, listen. This is not grand history in the trumpet sense. No army crosses a plain. No ruler declares anything carved in stone. Yet the power here is steady and enormous. A household turns a fragile liquid into stored richness. A family turns animal pasture into human endurance. A room full of smoke and clay becomes a small engine of civilization. You lie near the hearth as embers settle. The last sounds are soft, a pot lid nudged into place, a sleepy animal exhaling. Someone rubbing sore wrists, the faint creak of a hanging bag in the corner. The smell of sour cream has faded into warm fat and ash. In the darkness, the churn waits for morning, patient as a moonlit post. The butter rests nearby, pale and quiet, holding within it the work of hands, the breath of animals, the heat of fire, and the calm intelligence of people who learned, by listening carefully, when milk was ready to become something more. You enter a room where food no longer feels merely practical. The air is cooler here, shaded by thick walls and guarded doorways. Outside, sunlight strikes stone courtyards until they shimmer. Inside, lamps flicker, bowls gleam, and every object seems to have been placed with care. Butter sits among incense, grain, honey, fruit, wine, milk, flowers, and polished vessels. It is still soft, still made from animals and human labour, still faintly scented with pasture, but now it has crossed a quiet border. It has become something worthy of gods, kings, ancestors, and the serious people who stand between them and everybody else. You walk barefoot across a floor swept smooth. The stone feels cool under your soles. Somewhere, a priest murmurs words in a low voice, the kind of voice that suggests nobody should interrupt, even with a very sensible question. You smell smoke, resin, clean linen, warm fat, and crushed herbs. A bronze or clay lamp gives a tiny hiss as fuel moves toward flame. A servant carries a shallow bowl, both hands steady, eyes lowered. The butter inside catches the light. It is pale gold, almost private in its glow. This is the strange promotion of butter. It begins as a way to save nourishment, but it does not stay in the pantry. Ancient societies often understood food as communication. You fed the living, yes, but you also fed the dead. You fed household spirits. You fed temple fires. You fed divine statues. Not because statues chewed politely when no one was looking, but because offerings created order. Food became a bridge between visible need and invisible power. Butter, dense and fragrant, was especially suited to this work. It melted beautifully. It carried scent. It enriched bread and grain. It disappeared into flame with a soft, bright flare, which is frankly excellent behaviour if your job is to look sacred. A mainstream historical fact comes clearly from ancient South Asia. Clarified butter, known as ghee, held a central role in Vedic ritual, where it was poured into sacred fire as an offering. Fire carried the offering upward, turning fat into flame, smoke, and meaning. You stand near such a ritual space and hear the crackle as ghee touches heat. The flame lifts, gold within gold. The smell is nutty, sweet, and clean, richer than raw butter, with the milk solids removed and the water driven away. Clarified butter lasts longer in warm climates, but in ritual it becomes more than preservation. It becomes purity, abundance, and a shining substance fit for divine attention. You feel the heat on your face. A ladle is passed from one careful hand to another. The ghee is not tossed carelessly. It is measured, spoken over, offered in rhythm. The atmosphere is not loud, it is concentrated. Even the birds outside seem to pause, though that may be your imagination, and history is full of people imagining that birds are impressed by ceremonies. The liquid falls, the fire answers. In that answering, as a community hears assurance. The world may be unpredictable, crops may fail, rulers may become unreasonable, and relatives may remain relatives, which is its own enduring trial. But ritual gives shape to uncertainty. Butter also enters royal spaces, where appetite and authority sit very close together. You pass into a palace kitchen, and the mood changes immediately. Here, holiness gives way to controlled chaos. Copper vessels ring against tables. Workers move with quick feet. Grinding stones rasp. Bread bakes against hot walls. Meat roasts. Dates, figs, onions, garlic, herbs, and spices fill the air, depending on the region and the wealth of the court. Butter is carried in small amounts if rare. Larger quantities if the ruler's lands are rich in pasture. It may be mixed into grain dishes, brushed on bread, melted over vegetables, or used to finish foods meant to impress guests who are already pretending not to be impressed. You touch the edge of a serving bowl. It is warm, almost too warm. A slick of melted butter glistens across the surface of a thick porridge or fragrant rice. The food smells deeper now. Fat has a way of making aroma bloom. It gathers flavour and carries it to the tongue. That is one reason elites prized it. Luxury is not always about rarity alone. Sometimes luxury is texture, softness, shine. The feeling that the world has been made smoother for you than it is for other people. In tombs and for funerary settings, butter and other dairy products could join the imagined provisions for the dead. You walk through a chamber prepared not for daily life, but for eternity, or at least for a very ambitious version of it. Jars stand in rows, baskets hold grain, painted scenes show animals, servants, fields, feasts, and the hope that comfort will continue beyond breath. The smell here is dry, mineral, and faintly resinous, with traces of linen and sealed storage. Even when the actual butter is gone, its idea remains. The dead are not sent away empty-handed. They are supplied with the good things that marked a complete life. Historians still argue whether certain ancient references to butter or dairy fat in elite records should be read as literal food supplies, ritual substances, medicinal ingredients, or symbols of wealth. Translation is not always kind. A word may mean butter in one context, curd in another, fat in a third, and something white and expensive that made accountants tired in a fourth, though the scribes did not phrase it quite that way. The further back you travel, the more food words slide between categories. Ancient people did not always separate cooking, healing, sacrifice, and status as neatly as modern shelves do. Medicine welcomes butter too. You step into a smaller room where the air smells of herbs, smoke, and the sharp bitterness of crushed roots. A healer warms fat gently in a small vessel. Butter can be a carrier, a softening agent, a base for salves, or a food recommended for strength. In several ancient medical traditions, fats were used to soothe skin, carry plant ingredients, or nourish the weak. You watch the healer stir until the mixture shines. It is not magic in the storybook sense, though sometimes it wears magic's clothing. It is observation, belief, prayer, and trial woven together. Does this salve ease cracked hands? Does this warm fat help a cough? Does this offering calm fear? Human beings tend to keep what seems to help, even when they cannot fully explain why. A quirky tidbit waits in the world of sacred butter lamps. In parts of the Himalayan and Tibetan Buddhist world, butter lamps became important devotional objects, traditionally fueled by yak butter. Their flames are offered as symbols of wisdom and the clearing of darkness. The image is lovely, though the practical side is less poetic. Lots of butter, lots of lamps, lots of smoke, and somewhere a caretaker thinking, very calmly. That enlightenment appears to require considerable cleaning. Still, the glow matters. A flame fed by butter is soft, golden, and steady. It makes a room feel watched over. You sit near such a flame in your mind, and the sound around you lowers, a wick trembles. The melted fat gives off a warm animal sweetness. Your fingers, if you touch the lamp's rim, find heat gathered in metal. The atmosphere feels suspended, as though the room has exhaled and not yet breathed in again. Butter has become light. Food has become sight. Pasture has become prayer. The royal table shows another face of the same transformation. Power likes to eat visibly. A king or queen does not simply consume food. They display access to land, animals, labour, trade, and specialised skill. Butter at such a table says that herds were healthy, milk was collected, workers knew their craft, and storage was secure. It says there was surplus beyond emergency. The rich often turn surplus into ceremony, then ceremony into hierarchy, then hierarchy into dinner, and somehow everybody is expected to admire the table settings. You move behind the servants as dishes are arranged, linen brushes your arm, a platter passes close, fragrant with melted fat and spice. Someone whispers a correction. Someone else adjusts a cup by the width of a finger. Elite dining is full of rules that make hunger wait. Butter may appear in a sauce, in a sweet preparation, in a grain dish, or as a finishing richness. It does not shout. It gleams. It softens edges. It makes food feel complete. Yet butter never loses its double nature. It can belong to a priest's ladle and a herder's hand, to a palace feast and a child's bread, to a lamp flame and a healing salve. That is part of its power. Some foods become sacred because they are rare. Others become sacred because they are ordinary enough to carry deep trust. Butter manages both. It is familiar but also precious, made daily, but easily elevated, perishable, but capable of lasting when clarified, humble in origin, yet comfortable among gold. Night settles over the sacred compound or palace court. The day's heat leaves the stones slowly. You hear sandals scuff, vessels being washed, animals calling from distant pens, a final chant fading into thick air. The butter that was offered has vanished into flame. The butter that was eaten has become warmth in the body. The butter sealed away in a jar waits in darkness. You understand why people gave it meaning. It is transformation. You can touch milk into cream, cream into butter, butter into food, medicine, light, smoke, memory, and status. The last lamp burns low, its flame leans, straightens, and leans again. The smell of warm fat softens into the night, in the quiet. Butter is no longer only a household craft. It is a golden language, spoken to gods, rulers, ancestors, and the fragile human hope that nourishment might reach beyond the body. You walk into the classical Mediterranean with the smell of olive groves on the wind, and butter immediately becomes a social problem, and not because it is dangerous, it's not because it tastes bad as a scent, but because people have started attaching manners to fat. Around you, the Roman world hums with markets, baths, temples, roads, legal arguments, and men in expensive clothing deciding that their habits are obviously the peak of civilization. Very convenient, really. Olive oil shines in lamps, perfumes the body, glazes bread, fries vegetables, and marks the table as properly Mediterranean. Butter, meanwhile, arrives from the colder edges of the map with the scent of cattle, wool, damp grass, and people who do not always care whether Rome approves. You stand in a Roman kitchen in the late afternoon. The room is warm, tiled, and busy. A cook crushes herbs in a mortar, the stone scraping in a slow circle. Fish sauce gives off a salty punch. Garlic bruises under pressure. Olive oil pours in a green gold ribbon, smooth and familiar. Its smell is fruity, peppery, and clean. This is the fat of respectability here, the fat of orchards, trade, wealth, and long sunny hillsides. It belongs to amphorae stacked in warehouses, to ships rocking in harbours, to estates where labourers tend trees whose roots grip dry soil. You can almost hear the Roman stomach saying, "Yes, this is civilized," which is exactly the kind of thing a stomach would say if it had conquered half the known world. Butter does not vanish from this world, but it enters awkwardly. A mainstream historical fact is that many Greeks and Romans knew butter, yet often associated it with northern peoples such as Celts, Germans, and Thracians, while olive oil remained the preferred culinary and cultural fat in the Mediterranean heartlands. Roman writers could describe butter as something eaten by outsiders, or used more as a medical ointment than as a desirable table fat. The judgment was not purely about flavour. It was about climate, agriculture, identity, and status. Food is never innocent once a society gets confident enough to insult someone else's breakfast. You leave the tiled kitchen and move northward in imagination, away from stone villas and olive presses toward damp forests and open pasture. The air changes. It grows cooler, heavier, green with moss and leaf mould. You smell smoke from a timber hall, wet wool drying near a fire, cattle breath, beer mash, and butter melting into grain. The ground softens beneath your feet. Rain beads on your cloak. A dog barks somewhere beyond a fence. Inside a longhouse, people sit close together, and the fire throws light across wooden beams blackened with years of smoke. Here, butter does not need to apologize. It belongs. You feel a wooden bowl passed into your hands. It is rough along the rim, warm where others have held it. Inside, grain or porridge carries a glossy richness. Butter melts quickly, leaving golden pools that catch firelight. There may be cheese nearby, curds, sour milk, ale, smoked meat, and hard bread. The flavours are strong, practical, and tied to cold weather. A soft fat from dairy animals makes sense where olives do not thrive. In regions of northern and western Europe, butter could serve the same daily role that oil served farther south, not because anyone failed a civilization exam, but because trees and cows have different opinions about climate. The Roman attitude towards such food tells you plenty about Rome. To call butter barbarian was not merely to describe a dietary difference. It was to place people into a mental landscape, us and them, refined and rough, orchard and pasture, toga and trousers. The old insult about barbarians often said more about the speaker's nerves than the target's table. Still, Roman suspicion had practical roots too. Butter spoils faster than oil in warm weather unless clarified or carefully stored. In hot Mediterranean cities, olive oil was stable, abundant, tradable, and deeply woven into ritual and economy. Butter smelled of colder regions, animal sheds, and short shelf life. It did not fit comfortably into the Roman idea of elegance. You enter a bathhouse because Rome has opinions about bodies as well as dinner. Steam thickens the air. Water slaps against stone basins. Sandaled feet whisper over wet floors. Olive oil is rubbed into skin, scraped away with a strigial to scented I traded and praised. But butter, in some accounts, has a place as a salve. It can soothe, soften, and carry herbs. You imagine a soldier with cracked skin from winter campaigning. A medic warms dairy fat in a small cup, mixes it with plants, and applies it to a raw patch on a hand or cheek. The touch is greasy, cooling, oddly comforting. Nobody in the bathhouse needs to call it fashionable. Relief has its own etiquette. On campaign, the boundaries blur further. Roman soldiers move through provinces where local food becomes unavoidable. They smell unfamiliar stews, hear languages that do not fold neatly into Latin, and discover that hunger can make cultural superiority relax its shoulders. Bread dipped in oil may be preferred, but grain enriched with butter can keep a body moving in cold country. A legionary who mocks northern habits at noon may accept warm buttered food by sunset if the rain has entered his boots. Empire spreads ideas. But the weather has a vote. A quirky tidbit waits in the peatlands of northwestern Europe. In bogs across places such as Ireland and Scotland, people have found lumps of ancient bog butter, sometimes packed in wooden containers, animal skins, or other wrappings, preserved by the cool, acidic, low-oxygen conditions of peat. Some examples are centuries or even millennia old. The idea of burying butter in a bog sounds like a mistake made by someone with very poor pantry instincts. But the bog was not just mud. It was a preservative landscape, a boundary place, and possibly a hiding place. Also, imagine being the person who digs up a large waxy lump and hears someone say, "Technically, that may be butter. Archaeology is glamorous in very specific ways." Historians still argue whether bog butter was mainly stored for preservation, hidden for safekeeping, placed as an offering, aged for flavour, or used for purposes that combine several meanings at once. The uncertainty is deliciously stubborn. A bog can keep an object, but not always the intention behind it. You can hold the container, test the fat, date the wood, study the landscape, and still not know whether someone was saving winter food, honouring a spirit, avoiding theft, or experimenting with a flavour profile that would make a modern cheese board feel slightly nervous. You return to the Roman edge, where traders, soldiers, enslaved people, merchants, and migrants carry habits across borders. The frontier is not a clean line. It is a zone of bargaining, borrowing, suspicion, imitation, and practical compromise. In a military fort, you hear iron tools ringing, mule harness creaking, orders shouted over wind, and cooking pots bubbling in mixed traditions. A local woman sells dairy to soldiers, a trader offers oil in amphorae. Someone laughs at someone else's accent. Someone buys the food anyway. The empire's borders are full of little exchanges that official histories often flatten into grand strategy. But civilization is also built in markets where people sniff a product, haggle badly, and decide whether dinner is worth the price. Touch the difference between the two fats. Olive oil runs over your fingers, slick and liquid, catching the light in a thin film. Butter yields as a solid, then softens against skin, intimate and changeable. Oil feels like sunlight stored in fruit. Butter feels like grass stored in an animal, then worked by hand into something dense. One belongs to groves and presses. The other belongs to udders, churns, and cooler air. Neither is naturally superior, but cultures are very good at turning useful differences into moral judgments. Humanity has never met a pantry item it could not use for social ranking. Greek writers had their own ways of noticing butter, sometimes describing it as a product of peoples beyond their agricultural norms. The word itself, in Greek forms, was connected to cattle and cheese or curd, which hints at how dairy categories could blur. To a Mediterranean observer, butter might seem like an odd northern cousin of cheese, pale and fatty, not quite fitting the familiar categories of oil, wine, grain, and fruit. You can sense the curiosity beneath the disdain. People mock what unsettles them, especially when it melts nicely on bread. In the northern hall, meanwhile, no one waits for Roman approval. A woman lifts a lid from a pot, and steam rolls out with the smell of barley, onions, and fat. A child tears bread with both hands. A warrior, farmer, or herder dips a piece into melted butter and eats with quiet satisfaction. Outside, rain taps on the roof, the fire pops, smoke gathers beneath the rafters in a blue-grey layer. The atmosphere is close, communal, and alive with the scrape of spoons and the murmur of voices. This is not barbarism as Roman imagination paints it. It is adaptation. It is climate made into cuisine. It is people eating what their land provides. Still, suspicion travels both ways. A northerner might find Roman olive oil strange, thin, and perfumed. A Roman might find butter heavy, sour, and too animal. The table becomes a map of belonging. You are what you eat, yes, but you are also what you refuse to eat, what you mock, what you secretly enjoy, and what you claim was only medicine when someone catches you spreading it. Night settles over a frontier settlement. On one side of the road, an amphora of oil leans against a wall, sealed and ready for trade. On the other, a covered pot holds butter in the cool air. A lamp burns with oil, steady and familiar. A bowl of grain gleams with melted dairy fat, warm and fragrant. The two worlds do not cancel each other. They meet, hesitate, judge, borrow, and continue. You listen to the soft wind moving through grass beyond the fort and the distant lowing of cattle. The butter waits in its pot, carrying the taste of places Rome could name, tax, fear, admire, and misunderstand, but never fully turn into itself. You wake before sunrise to the sound of a bell moving through cold air. It is not a grand bell, not yet the roaring voice of a cathedral tower, but a smaller, is steadier note calling bodies out of sleep and into duty. The world is blue at the edges. Frost clings to the grass. The stones under your feet hold the night inside them, and when you step into the dairy room, the chill comes up through your soles as if the floor has been waiting all night to make its point. The monastery is already breathing. Somewhere beyond the cloister, a door opens on iron hinges. A monk clears his throat. A cow shifts in the byre, and the chain at her neck gives a tiny metallic answer. You smell hay, damp wool, old wood, smoke from a banked fire, and the sour sweetness of milk standing in shallow pans. The air feels close and clean at once, scrubbed by cold, softened by animals. A thin light enters through a small window and lays itself across rows of vessels, each one holding yesterday's work in quiet suspension. You bend over a pan of milk. Cream has risen overnight, thickening on the surface like a pale skin of wealth. A hand beside yours, reddened from cold water and repeated washing, skims it carefully into a separate bowl. This hand may belong to a lay sister, a dairymaid hired by the abbey, a tenant woman fulfilling an obligation, or a servant whose name will not appear in the accounts except as a cost. If she is lucky. Medieval butter is not made by romance. It is made by wrists, shoulders, backs, dawns, and the very patient endurance of people who cannot simply press a button and wander away. A mainstream historical fact settles into this early light monasteries in medieval Europe were important centres of agricultural management, and many kept cattle, sheep, or goats, while producing dairy foods for their own communities, for guests, for charity, and sometimes for sale or rent. The monastery was not only a place of prayer, it was also a landlord, storehouse, workshop, farm office, and food machine. Very spiritual, certainly, but also very interested in whether the cows were milking well this week. You take hold of a churn. It is wooden, tall, and worn smooth at the places where many hands have gripped it. The handle is cold at first. Then, as you work, warmth gathers in your palms. The sound begins as a loose splash, then grows thicker. Thud, suck, thud, pause. The rhythm fills the room until it feels almost like another form of prayer, though less elegant than chanting and considerably harder on the elbows. In a monastery, repetition is familiar. Psalms repeat, bells repeat, steps around the cloister repeat. Butter making fits this world perfectly, because it asks for disciplined motion and gives no reward to impatience. Outside, the yard wakes into grey light, chickens complain, a cartwheel creaks, a novice hurries past carrying a bucket too full for his dignity. Steam rises from a cow's flank as she is led from the shelter. The scent of manure sharpens the air, mixing with straw and smoke. You hear milk strike a pail in quick, foamy streams. The sound is gentle, but urgent. Milk will not wait politely for theology to finish. Butter in medieval life is tangled with fasting. Christian rules restricted the eating of meat in many times and places. Also animal products such as butter, milk, cheese and eggs during Lent and other fast days. The exact rules could vary by region, date, and authority, which is wonderfully medieval, meaning everyone knew rules mattered, and also spent a great deal of energy negotiating them. Fish might be allowed when a meat was not. Oil could replace butter where oil was available, but in colder northern lands, olive oil was expensive, unfamiliar, or simply less practical, and people wanted their familiar dairy fat. You feel the problem in the kitchen. A pot of beans without butter is still food. Yes, bread without butter still fills the stomach, but a winter diet of grains, roots, ale, and preserved foods grows heavy and dull. Butter brings softness, it gives warmth, it helps the body feel cared for. When fasting rules remove it, the absence is not just symbolic, it is felt in the mouth, in the belly, in the mood of everyone staring at yet another bowl of something virtuous. Here the medieval world reveals its talent for paperwork, permissions, dispensations, and regional customs developed around the use of butter during fasting seasons. In some places, people could receive or purchase permission to eat dairy when oil was scarce or health required it. The holy calendar met the practical pantry, and the result was not always graceful. One famous tradition says that the so-called butter tower of Rouen Cathedral was connected with payments from people allowed to eat butter during Lent. Whether every detail of that story is as neat as tourist legends prefer is another matter, but the idea itself is beautifully human. Deny butter, then build upward with butter money. The soul climbs, the toast improves. Everyone tries not to look too amused. Historians still argue whether late medieval permissions for butter were driven mainly by climate and nutrition, by church income, by local custom, or by a sincere effort to balance discipline with mercy. The evidence sits in account books, church rulings, letters, sermons, and local records that do not always agree. A rule might look strict in a theological text, but more flexible in a village ledger. A bishop might insist on restraint while a household quietly follows the habits of its region. Food history often lives in that gap between what authorities declared and what hungry people actually did. You leave the monastery dairy and enter a village morning. The roofs are thatched, the lane damp, the air thick with chimney smoke and the smell of wet earth. A woman stands beside a low table, working butter in a wooden bowl. Her fingers are strong, nails short, knuckles roughened by lye, cold and endless washing. She presses the butter with a paddle, folding it over itself again and again to drive out liquid. The sound is soft and repetitive, a slap against wood, a scrape, a sigh. Her sleeve is rolled up, her breath clouds in front of her face. A child leans near the table and is told, with impressive calm, not to touch. Village butter is food, but also money in a form you can spread. It may go to market wrapped in leaves, packed in pots, shaped into rolls, or pressed into small moulds. It may pay rent or dues owed to a lord, parish, or monastery. It may be part of a woman's household economy, one of the products she can manage, trade, or sell. Eggs, cheese, butter, spun thread, small garden produce. These humble items carry quiet financial power, not the sort sung by minstrels, naturally. Minstrels tend to prefer swords and doomed romance, which is rude to dairy accounting. The market smells alive by mid-morning. Mud sucks at your shoes. Pigs nose under carts. Geese announce legal opinions to anyone nearby. Bread steams under cloth. Onions, leeks, smoked fish, wool, leather, apples, ale, and cheese compete in the air. Butter sits in baskets or crocks, judged by colour, smell, firmness, and trust. Buyers know that a pretty surface can hide poor washing or too much buttermilk. They sniff, they press, they ask where it came from. Medieval shoppers were not helpless innocents. They were experts in suspicion, and honestly, they had to be. A quirky tidbit appears in the carved patterns pressed into butter. In many rural traditions, wooden butter stamps and moulds marked butter with flowers, animals, crosses, initials, or geometric designs. Some marks identified a household at market. Some made the butter attractive for feast days. Some may have carried protective meaning, because when your family's food, reputation, and rent depend on a soft yellow lump, you may as well give it a nice symbol and a little spiritual backup. You run your thumb over a carved stamp. The grooves catch against your skin, pressed into butter. They leave a clean little flower, brief as frost and much more useful. In wealthier households, butter appears with greater variety. It enriches sauces, pastries, pottages, fish dishes, and breads. Cooks in noble kitchens work with large fires, long tables, iron hooks, and an army of servants moving at different speeds. You smell roasting, vinegar, herbs, smoke, and fat. Butter melts into a pan with a low hiss, foaming at the edges. It can turn quickly if overheated, so the cook watches closely. Medieval cooking is not crude. It is skilled, layered, and alert. A sauce must balance sharpness and richness. A pastry must hold. A fish dish for a fast day may still taste luxurious if butter is allowed. Piety and pleasure often sit closer than sermons prefer to admit. Night gathers again around the village. The dairy vessels are washed and turned upside down. The churn stands empty, its wood damp and dark. In a cool corner, finished butter waits under cloth, firming in the cold. You touch it lightly. It gives just a little smooth beneath your fingertip, carrying the scent of cream, smoke, and grass. The day's labour has become something quiet and valuable. It will go into bread, rent, soup, market trade, feast, fast, kindness, argument, and memory. The bell sounds again in the distance, softer now. Cows settle into straw. A woman rubs her wrists beside the hearth. The room darkens to amber. Butter, in this medieval world, is never merely a taste. It is discipline and a loophole, prayer and profit, household skill and village currency, the small golden proof that daily labour can become comfort. You step onto a wooden dock where the morning smells of tar, salt, wet rope, fish, and human ambition. The harbour is awake in layers. Gulls cry over masts. Barrels knock against one another as they are rolled toward waiting ships. Sailors shout from decks slick with spray. A horse stamps on the stones, annoyed by history, weather, and probably everything else. Near your feet, a cask is sealed tight with hoops, its wood dark from handling. Inside rests butter packed with salt, pressed hard enough to survive a voyage, or at least to make a respectable attempt. The sea changes butter. On land, butter belongs to dairies, kitchens, fields, and cool storerooms. At sea, it becomes cargo, ration, risk, and smell. You touch the side of the cask and feel damp wood under your palm. It is heavy with fat, salt, labour, and the hope that nothing leaks. The ship beside you groans softly as the tide lifts it. Butter is going somewhere, across water, into markets, into colonies, into forts, into households that miss a taste of home, and into places where local fats already have their own proud traditions. A mainstream historical fact follows you up the gangplank in the early modern Atlantic world. Salted butter was traded and shipped in barrels or firkins, especially from dairy regions such as Ireland, the Low Countries, and parts of northern Europe. Butter could feed sailors, supply military posts, provision plantations and settlements, and serve urban markets where fresh dairy was not always available. Salt and packing mattered enormously. A badly packed cask could sour, leak, or arrive with flavours that suggested the ocean had been far too involved in the recipe. You enter the hold, and the air tightens around you. It smells of wood, bilge water, rope fibre, salted meat, vinegar, old grain, and the thick, creamy heaviness of stored fat. The boards are rough beneath your fingers. Somewhere above, a block creaks as a sail shifts. The light is dim and brown, broken by thin lines between planks. Barrels sit wedged together like silent passengers. Butter travels beside cod, cheese, beer, peas, flour, tools, cloth, and sometimes livestock, because ships are floating arguments between appetite and decay. At sea, food is a clock. Fresh bread disappears. Fresh meat becomes memory. Water grows questionable, which is not the most soothing thought, but it is very historically honest. Salted butter can help make hard biscuit more bearable, enrich peas porridge, soften dry bread, and bring calories to bodies hauling rope in cold spray. You imagine a sailor scraping butter from a small ration, the knife dragging through a firm, salty mass. It is not the tender table butter of a calm morning. It is sharper, denser, and faintly wooden from the cask. Yet when it melts into hot grain, the smell rises warmly, and for a moment the ship feels less like a wet prison with sails, and more like a place where a person might continue living. Across the Atlantic, butter meets new landscapes. European colonists bring cattle, dairy customs, churns, and expectations with them to the Americas. But cows do not simply step off a ship and become abundance. They need pasture, water, shelter, labour, breeding, protection, and time. In some settlements, dairy farming grows slowly because survival demands other priorities. In others, cattle thrive, multiplying into herds that change land use and local economies. You walk through a colonial yard and smell split wood, cornmeal, smoke, damp leather, manure, and cream souring in a covered pan. The butter here is familiar in method but different in context, pressed into a world shaped by migration, conflict, trade, and unequal power. The churn stands near a wall, and you take the handle. It is a plunger churn, plain and practical. Your hand fits into a groove worn by use. A woman works beside you, sleeves rolled, expression calm in the way people look when the day has already made too many requests. The milk may come from cows grazing near cleared fields, their bells dull in the humid air. In warmer regions, butter making must bend to heat. Cream can sour too quickly, butter can soften into trouble. Storage becomes a small battle. Spring houses, cellars, streams, and shaded dairies become valuable tools. Coolness is not a luxury. Coolness is technology. In the Caribbean and parts of the southern colonies, imported butter competes with local fats and oils and with the realities of climate. Palm oil, coconut, animal lard, sesame, ground nut oils, and other regional fats all have their places depending on geography and community. Butter may be desired by Europeans as a taste of home, but it does not conquer every kitchen. It must negotiate. Sometimes it is too expensive. Sometimes it spoils. Sometimes another fat is simply better for the dish, the weather, or the people cooking it. Food exchange is not a parade where one ingredient marches in and everyone applauds. It is more like a crowded market where every smell has an opinion. You cross into West African coastal trading towns in imagination, where the air is warm, salted by the ocean, and rich with palm smoke, spices, dried fish, earth, and human movement. Here, dairy butter may be rare in many humid regions where cattle keeping faces environmental limits, but other butters and fats matter deeply. Shea butter, made from the nuts of the shea tree, is used in cooking, skincare, trade, and daily life across parts of West Africa. Its texture is different, grainier when cool, melting smoothly against skin. You touch a small lump and feel it soften in your palm. It smells nutty, earthy, and faintly smoky. The word butter stretches here, not as a trick, but as a reminder that human beings name softness, richness, and usefulness in related ways. Move eastward, and the Indian Ocean world opens like a woven map. Monsoon winds fill sails, ports speak many languages, spices, textiles, rice, horses, metals, ceramics, and ideas move between coasts. In South Asia, clarified butter remains important in many kitchens and households, not merely as ritual substance but as daily cooking fat where wealth, region, and taste allow. It competes with sesame oil, mustard oil, coconut oil, and other local fats, each carrying its own flavour and identity. You stand in a hot courtyard where ghee warms in a pan. The scent turns nutty and sweet. Mustard seeds crackle nearby in oil. A cook chooses one fat over another not because history demands a winner, but because the dish asks for a voice. In Central Asian and Himalayan pastoral worlds, butter travels by animal, tent, saddlebag, and trade route. Yak, cow, sheep, goat, and mare all belong to different dairying systems depending on altitude and culture. You sit in a highland tent as wind presses against the walls. The air smells of wool, smoke, tea, leather, and cold stone outside. A bowl is placed in your hands. It is warm, salty, and thick with butter. Butter tea may surprise a visitor expecting sweetness, but in a cold, high place, it makes immediate sense. It warms the throat, coats the lips, and gives energy. Your fingers curl around the bowl, absorbing heat while the wind whispers through seams in the tent. The taste is not dessert. It is survival with manners. A quirky tidbit waits in the world of butter colour. In parts of Europe and North America, and butter from cows grazing fresh spring grass naturally turned a deeper yellow because of pigments in the plants. Winter butter could be pale, so some dairies and households coloured it with things like marigold, carrot, or annatto to make it look richer. humanity looked at seasonal variation and said, charmingly, could we perhaps make this more marketable? The eye eats first, even when the cow has been very clear about February. Scholars continue to debate how much colonial butter economies depended on the hidden labour of women, servants, enslaved people, and indigenous knowledge of land and climate, because many records credit male landowners while leaving daily dairy workers almost invisible. Account books may list pounds of butter sold, a merchant record may note casks shipped, a traveller may praise a household's excellent table, but who rose in the cold, skimmed the cream, washed the pans, guarded the spring house, and saved the batch when the weather turned often? The paper does not say. The butter is counted, the hands vanish. You enter a port warehouse where inspectors test casks. A long tool pierces packed butter to sample its quality from within. The smell that emerges tells a story at once clean and salty, or sour, rancid, smoky, fishy, or suspiciously complicated. Merchants care because reputation travels. Irish butter, for example, became famous in overseas trade, and quality control in major butter markets helped buyers trust what they were purchasing. You can almost hear the dry judgment of an experienced inspector lifting a sample to his nose. No speech needed, one sniff, and a farmer somewhere has been spiritually summoned for questioning. Butter also becomes emotional cargo. Migrants carry tastes across oceans in memory when they cannot carry the food itself. In a new settlement, a pat of butter on bread may evoke fields left behind, a mother's kitchen, a market town, a feast day, a language spoken more easily at home. Food helps people pretend the world has not changed too much. It also proves that it has. The butter tastes different because the grass is different, the cows are different, the salt is different, the air is warmer, the churn is new. The neighbours cook with another fat, and the person eating it is no longer quite the person who left. Evening falls over the harbour again. The ship's rigging hums in a low wind. Barrels wait in rows. Somewhere, a kitchen fire catches, and butter melts into a pan with a soft hiss, joining pepper, onions, grain, or fish. Somewhere else, palm oil reddens a stew, coconut oil perfumes rice, mustard oil bites the air, and ghee glows in a brass cup. The world does not become one flavour. It becomes a meeting of fats, each carrying climate, animal, tree, labour, memory, and trade. You stand at the water's edge as the tide darkens, as the dock is cool beneath your feet, salt dries on your lips. A cask is lifted, swung, and lowered into a hold, its weight briefly suspended between land and sea. Butter, softest of foods, has become sturdy enough to cross oceans. It travels as ration, comfort, business, adaptation, and longing, taking the grass of one shore into the kitchens of another, where it melts and becomes local, one quiet spoonful at a time. You step into the 19th century with the smell of hot metal, coal smoke, damp straw, and fresh cream hanging in the air. The dairy is no longer only a quiet corner of the household. It is becoming a room of gauges, pipes, pulleys, ledgers, and men with serious moustaches who believe every problem can be improved by a machine that makes a repetitive noise. Outside, cattle stand in misty fields, their breath white in the morning chill. Inside, milk arrives in cans, sloshing against tin, carried by tired arms and then weighed, tested, poured, and judged. The floor is stone, wet from washing. Your boots make a soft scraping sound as you cross it. A worker tips a metal can, and milk rushes out in a smooth white sheet, striking a receiving vat with a hollow splash. Steam curls from a pipe overhead. Somewhere, a belt turns around a wheel with a steady slap. The air feels warmer near the boiler and colder near the storage room, as if the building itself cannot decide whether it is a barn or a factory. That confusion is exactly the point. Butter is changing shape socially, economically, and physically. It is still made from cream, but cream itself is being captured with a new urgency. For centuries, as cream rose slowly when milk sat in pans, gravity did the work, and gravity, though dependable, is not famous for speed. In a shallow dairy pan, the fattier cream drifted upward over many hours, then had to be skimmed by hand. The method was simple, familiar, and limited. It needed space, cool air, careful timing, and clean vessels. It also left behind some fat in the skimmed milk, which would have irritated any efficiency-minded person standing nearby with a notebook. The industrial age looked at this slow rising and politely declared war on patience. A mainstream historical fact enters with a whir the centrifugal cream separator, developed and commercialized in the late 19th century, transformed dairying by spinning milk rapidly, so cream could be separated from skim milk far faster and more efficiently than by old pan setting. Gustave de Laval is closely associated with this breakthrough, and his separator became one of the defining machines of modern dairy production. You watch one at work, and it feels almost magical, though the magic is really physics wearing a metal jacket. Milk enters the machine, the bowl spins at tremendous speed, and the heavier skim milk moves outward, while the lighter cream gathers separately. The result flows from different spouts, neat and decisive. You place a hand on the separator's side, it trembles under your palm, alive with rotation. The vibration travels through your fingers and wrist, a controlled shiver. The sound is high and constant, a humming whine under the larger clank of the dairy. Warm milk smells sweet and animal. Fresh cream smells rounder, softer, faintly grassy. Workers move quickly with pails and records. Quantity matters now. Fat percentage matters. Cleanliness matters in a new, formal way. Taste still matters, but taste has gained companions named measurement, standardization, and inspection, and they are very fond of paperwork. The creamery becomes a new kind of village centre in many dairy regions. Farmers bring milk or cream in wagons, the wheels creaking along muddy roads at dawn. You stand outside as horses stamp and shake their harnesses. Tin cans knock together with a bright metallic clatter. A farmer lifts a lid and peers inside, as though the cream might have developed a personality during the journey. Inside the creamery, each delivery is weighed and sampled. The value of the cream depends on butterfat, and butterfat becomes a number, not just a household impression. Richness enters arithmetic. The cow's morning work is translated into columns. This is both liberation and loss. For some farm families, selling cream to a centralized creamery saves their hours of churning and improves income. The household no longer must produce every batch alone. Cooperative creameries can give small farmers access to equipment they could never buy individually. Yet the old rhythms shift. The dairymaid's hand, once trusted by smell, sound, and texture, now meets the tester's glassware and the manager's ledger. Skill does not disappear, it changes uniform. The person who can judge cream by scent still matters, but the person who can operate machinery and interpret records begins to hold power too. You enter a testing room where the atmosphere is sharp with acid, hot water, and clean glass. The Babcock test, introduced in the late 19th century, helps measure butterfat in milk with practical reliability. A small bottle spins in a centrifuge, and cream fat rises into a narrow graduated neck. You lean close, careful not to touch anything unpleasant, and see a golden column of fat marked by tiny lines. It is strangely beautiful, this miniature tower of value. A farmer may be paid according to such results. A cow may be praised or quietly judged. A breed may rise in reputation. Butter, once a lump in a bowl, is now data. A quirky tidbit slides in with the colour of the finished product. Buttermakers sometimes used harmless colouring agents such as annatto to maintain a rich yellow shade all year, especially when winter feed made butter pale. Consumers had learned to associate deeper yellow with pasture, quality, and abundance. So the factory gave the eye what it wanted. It is one of those tiny theatrical tricks of food history. The butter is real. The colour is guided, and everyone at breakfast feels emotionally reassured. Very dignified behaviour from civilization. Naturally, food historians still disagree over whether industrial butter improved ordinary diets more by making butter cheaper and more available, or weakened older local flavour traditions by pushing producers toward uniformity. The evidence can point in both directions. A factory can raise hygiene standards, reduce spoilage, and create a consistent product that travels well. It can also flatten the small variations of season, pasture, breed, and household technique that once made butter taste distinctly of one valley, one farm, one woman's method, one patch of clover. Modernity often arrives with clean pipes in one hand and a very large eraser in the other. Cold machines deepen the transformation. You step into a refrigerated storage room, and the change in atmosphere is immediate. The air tightens around your face. Your breath seems smaller. The smell is clean, faintly metallic, with the mild sweetness of chilled cream and wooden boxes. Butter firms in the cold, holding its shape, resisting spoilage, waiting for trains, ships, shops, and distant tables. Mechanical refrigeration develops through the 19th century and spreads into commercial food systems, changing what can be stored, transported, and sold. Butter no longer belongs only to nearby markets and favourable weather. It can travel through controlled cold. Railways carry it farther. You hear the station long before you see it, steam hissing, brakes shrieking, porters calling, hooves clattering on stone, crates sliding across platforms. Butter packed in boxes or tubs joins a moving world of meat, fruit, milk, eggs, and fish. Cities grow hungry, and rural districts feed them. A family in an urban apartment may buy butter wrapped in paper from a grocer, never seeing the cow, the churn, the separator, or the creamery floor. Distance becomes invisible. The wrapper tells a story in print, but the body of the food has travelled through systems too large for one hand to understand. Branding appears soft at first, then bolder. Labels promise purity, freshness, country quality, scientific cleanliness, and all the comforting things people want when they can no longer personally inspect the farm. A block of butter becomes a product with a name. Its package may carry a pastoral scene, perhaps a smiling cow, a meadow, a red barn, or a milkmaid who looks suspiciously clean for the job. The city buyer sees reassurance, the factory sees market identity, the cow, not consulted, continues chewing. Inside the creamery, churning is mechanized too. You stand beside a large barrel churn turning on an axle. It rotates slowly, heavily, with a rolling thunder inside. Cream slaps against wood, breaks, thickens, and gathers. The smell changes as buttermilk separates, becoming sharper and more open. When the churn is stopped and opened, cold damp air rushes out carrying the scent of fresh butter. Workers wash the grains, drain the buttermilk, work in salt, and pack the finished mass into moulds, tubs, or wrappers. Their hands may still touch the product, but always inside a larger choreography of machines. Politics enters through purity laws and public anxiety. Industrial food creates trust problems. Milk can be watered. Butter can be adulterated. Packages can mislead. Urban consumers fear invisible dangers, and not without reason. Governments and reformers push for inspection, standards, and labelling. The dairy industry must present itself as clean, modern, and dependable. You can feel the moral energy around sanitation, whitewashed walls, washable surfaces, shining metal, clean aprons, covered hair, scrubbed floors. Cleanliness becomes part of the product, almost an ingredient. The butter must taste good, but it must also look innocent. Electricity changes the room again. Motors replace some belts. Lights extend working hours. Pumps move liquids, thermometers, pasteurizers, cold rooms, and standardized cultures help producers control flavor and safety. Cream can be ripened deliberately with selected bacteria, producing a predictable cultured butter. Sweet cream butter, made from fresh rather than soured cream, also gains ground in some markets as refrigeration improves. The old tang of farmhouse butter does not vanish, but the mild sweetness of factory butter becomes familiar to millions. A gentler, cleaner flavour suits the modern breakfast table, where surprise is usually less welcome than toast. You pause near a loading door as evening lowers over the creamery yard. The machines slow one by one. The sudden quiet feels thick, almost startling. Water runs through a drain. A worker rinses a metal pail, and the sound rings bright in the cooling air. Outside, wagons leave ruts in the mud. A train whistle calls from far off, thin and lonely. Butter rests in packed rows, square, weighed, salted, chilled, wrapped, and ready for markets its makers may never visit. You touch one finished package. The paper is cool and slightly waxy. Beneath it, the butter is firm, smooth, anonymous, and strangely powerful. It carries pasture and cow, yes, but also steam power, engineering, chemistry, railroads, refrigeration, inspection, advertising, and trust. The everyday food has entered the age of systems. It no longer waits quietly in a household crock. It moves through cold corridors and iron rails, through ledgers and labels, through factories humming into the night, still golden, still softening when warmed, still ready to melt into the first warm thing that welcomes it. You enter a kitchen where the table is scrubbed clean, the stove is warm, and everybody has an opinion. This is dangerous territory, not battlefield dangerous, not plague cart dangerous, but family breakfast dangerous, which can be surprisingly intense. A crock of butter sits under a cloth, cool and pale, carrying all the authority of habit. Beside it waits another substance, smoother, cheaper, and deeply suspicious to many eyes. Margarine has arrived, and the room seems to lean toward it with curiosity, fear, hope, and the faint desire to argue before the toast gets cold. The morning smells of coal smoke, coffee, damp wool coats drying near the door, and bread browning on iron. A knife scrapes across a plate. A kettle ticks as it cools. You touch the edge of the butter crock and feel chilled stoneware beneath your fingers. Then you touch the new spread, firmer in some weather, softer in others, depending on recipe and room. It does not carry the same grassy perfume. It has a flatter scent, oily and mild, sometimes improved with milk, salt, colouring, or flavouring. To a poor household, it may smell like relief. To a dairy farmer, it may smell like economic disaster wearing a polite little apron. A mainstream historical fact comes clearly into the room. Margarine was invented in France in the late 1860s, after Emperor Napoleon III encouraged the creation of a cheaper butter substitute for the military and working people. The chemist Hippolyte Mege-Mouriès developed an early version using beef fat, milk, and other ingredients. It was not yet the vegetable oil spread many people imagine today. It began as an industrial answer to scarcity, price, and supply. Butter depended on cows, pasture, seasons, and careful handling. Margarine promised something more controllable. Naturally, everyone remained calm and reasonable about this. No, of course they did not. You step into a city shop where tubs, tins, papers, and jars crowd the counter. The air is sharp with cheese, brine, soap, smoked meat, and sawdust scattered on the floor. Customers arrive with baskets and coins counted tightly in their palms. A grocer cuts portions from larger blocks, weighing them on a scale that tips with metallic little clicks. Butter costs more. Margarine stretches the household budget. for families living close to the edge. The decision is not philosophical, it is arithmetic. How many children need bread? How many meals must this wage cover? How much pride can be afforded by Friday? Yet food is never only arithmetic. You hear the whispering. Is it wholesome? Is it fake? Is it honest? Will children grow strong on it? Is the grocer hiding it as butter? Does it come from clean factories or from mysterious vats, best not imagined near dinner? Industrial food unsettles people because it breaks the old chain of trust. A woman might know the farmer who made her butter. She might judge it by smell and colour. But margarine comes through patents, factories, chemical processes, brands, and claims printed in confident type. That kind of confidence can be useful, but it can also feel like someone selling you a secret. Dairy interests fight back hard. Farmers, creamery owners, and butter merchants see margarine as a threat not just to taste, but to livelihood. Laws appear in many countries and states to regulate, tax, label, restrict, or discourage it. In the United States especially, margarine becomes tangled in a long political struggle. Some laws tax it heavily, some restrict its colour, some require labels, some treat yellow margarine as if it is sneaking into society under a false name, which, to be fair, was sometimes exactly the accusation. The issue is honesty, but also competition. Butter wants protection, margarine wants access. The breakfast table becomes a legislative arena with crumbs. The colour war is wonderfully strange. Natural butter can be yellow, especially when cows graze fresh green pasture. Margarine, depending on ingredients, is often pale or white and less coloured. Many dairy advocates argue that yellow margarine deceives consumers by imitating butter. Margarine producers reply that people simply prefer their spread to look appetising. Governments respond with rules that sometimes become almost theatrical. In some places, margarine is sold white, with a separate packet of yellow colouring that families need in at home. Imagine sitting at the kitchen table, massaging dye into a bag of fat so the law and your toast can both feel respected. Civilization really does enjoy making breakfast complicated. A quirky tidbit belongs to this coloured margarine ritual. In parts of North America, families bought margarine in plastic bags with a small capsule of dye inside. You squeezed and kneaded the bag until the yellow spread through the white mass. Children often loved this job because it felt like forbidden kitchen magic. Adults may have loved it less, especially when the dye clung to fingers or the bag behaved badly. It was part food preparation, part legal compromise, part low-budget entertainment. Not every revolution arrives with drums. Some arrive with a squishy yellow packet. You move into the early 20th century and the factory smells change. Vegetable oils begin to matter more. Cottonseed, coconut, palm, soybean, and other oils can be processed, hardened, blended, and shaped into spreads. Hydrogenation, developed for food manufacturing in the early 1900s, helps turn liquid oils into more solid fats. This expands margarine production and changes its character. The spread becomes less tied to animal fat and more connected to global oilseed agriculture, chemical engineering, colonial trade, factory labour, and advertising. A slice of bread now carries an entire industrial map, though most people are mostly hoping it will not taste odd. You stand in a margarine plant where the air is warm, oily, and faintly sweet from added milk or flavouring. Pipes hum, metal vats reflect pale light, workers in aprons move through steam and noise. The floor is slick in places and your shoes grip carefully. Fat is melted, blended, cooled, churned, worked, coloured, salted, packed, wrapped, and shipped. It is not romantic, but it is efficient. The machines breathe steadily. Margarine is modern food in its most direct form, designed, scaled, priced, and defended by chemistry. Across the street in imagination, a butter dairy answers with its own modernity, clean white walls, cold storage, and quality grading, branded paper. pastoral images printed with industrial precision, butter does not remain a rustic innocent. It learns to advertise. It learns to promise purity, tradition, flavour, family, and the moral superiority of cows. Margarine answers with thrift, science, progress, and nourishment for ordinary people. The two fats become characters in a public drama. Butter is heritage. Margarine is modernity. Butter is nature. Margarine is cleverness. Each side exaggerates, because marketing without exaggeration tends to look shy and underfed. War sharpens the conflict. During major wars of the 20th century, butter can become scarce, expensive, or rationed. Armies need fats. Shipping is disrupted. Dairy production is strained. Civilian kitchens must adjust. Margarine steps forward as substitute, ration item, patriotic compromise, or unavoidable reality. You stand in a wartime kitchen under dim light, because fuel and electricity must be saved. The room smells of boiled potatoes, cabbage, weak tea, and damp coats. A ration book lies on the table, its pages handled so often the corners have softened. A woman measures fat carefully, scraping the knife flat so none is wasted. The sound is tiny, almost tender. In this kitchen, arguments about authenticity may feel luxurious. The question becomes what can be obtained, and how can it be made comforting? Margarine goes into cakes when butter is unavailable. It is spread thinly on bread. It is melted into vegetables or used to grease a pan. Children learn its taste as normal. Soldiers eat substitutes without ceremony. Cooks adapt recipes, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes with results everyone agrees not to discuss in detail. Scarcity teaches invention, but it also leaves memories. A person who grew up on wartime margarine may later crave butter as prosperity, or defend margarine as the taste of resilience. Historians still argue whether margarine's rise should be understood mainly as a victory of industrial food over traditional agriculture, a democratic expansion of affordable fat, or a story shaped by political protectionism and wartime necessity. Each interpretation catches part of the truth. Margarine did challenge dairy economies. It did feed people who could not always buy butter. It did depend on new technologies and global commodity chains. It did become a legal and cultural battleground far beyond its humble place on bread. The debate endures because the spread was never just a spread. It was a question who gets to define real food. You sit at a kitchen table in the 1950s. The atmosphere is brighter now, with enamel surfaces, cheerful packaging, radio voices, and the clean smell of soap. A refrigerator hums in the corner like a small domestic engine. Butter and margarine both live inside, wrapped and waiting. Advertising enters the home through magazines and jingles. One promises golden natural goodness, another promises modern health, economy, and easy spreading. A mother opens the refrigerator, and the cold air brushes your face. She chooses according to price, habit, doctor's advice, family taste, and what the children will actually eat without performing tragedy. Health arguments begin to grow louder. Animal fats, vegetable oils, cholesterol, vitamins, fortification, trans fats, saturated fats, heart disease. Each word arrives with experts, headlines, uncertainty, and worried shoppers. Margarine is at times promoted as healthier than butter. Later, some forms of hydrogenated margarine are criticized for trans fats. Butter, condemned in one decade, is partially redeemed in another, though never exactly given a crown and apology note. The science shifts as methods improve and diets are understood more carefully. Ordinary people stand in grocery aisles trying to make sense of it all, holding two packages and wondering why breakfast now requires a public health seminar. The touch of each fat remains persuasive. Butter is firm from the cold, then softens quickly at the edge of a warm knife. Margarine spreads more easily straight from the refrigerator, a practical charm that wins many rushed mornings. Butter browns in a pan, releasing a nutty fragrance as milk solids toast. Margarine melts differently, depending on its formula, sometimes foaming, sometimes sliding into an oily sheen. You hear eggs crack, toast spring from a toaster, a knife move across bread in smooth strokes. The kitchen battle is intimate because it happens at the scale of fingers, crumbs, and children asking for more. Night gathers outside the window. The debate's quiet. The packages return to the refrigerator, butter in its paper, margarine in its tub, both carrying histories far larger than their size. The table is wiped. The knife is washed. A last piece of toast cools on a plate, half golden with one spread, half pale with another, as if refusing to choose a side. You breathe in the fading smell of warm bread and fat. In the soft domestic hush, the great rivalry becomes simple again. Hunger, cost, comfort, trust, memory, and the stubborn human wish that whatever melts into our food might also make life a little easier. You enter a kitchen where butter stopped trying to prove itself and has simply become beloved. The room is not royal, not sacred, not industrial, and yet it holds a kind of power that rulers probably envy. A window fogs in the cool morning, a pan warms on the stove, bread waits under a cloth, and the table carries the small marks of daily life knife scratches, flour dust, a ring left by a cup, crumbs that somehow appear even when nobody admits to making them. The air smells of yeast, coffee, warm metal, and the soft sweetness of butter beginning to melt. You pick up a knife, the handle is smooth from use, familiar in the hand. The butter resists at first, firm from the cold, then yields in a clean curl. It spreads across toast with a faint rasp, sinking into the rough surface until dry bread becomes something fragrant and shining. This is one of butter's deepest gifts. It turns plain food into cared-for food. It does not need to dominate. It just arrives, softens, and quietly improves the situation, which is more than can be said for many historical figures. A mainstream historical fact rests in the warmth of the kitchen. Butter is essential to many classic pastry techniques, especially laminated dough, where repeated folding of butter between layers of dough creates the flaky structure of croissants, puff pastry, and related baked goods. The process depends on separation. Butter melts during baking, releases steam, and helps lift thin sheets of dough apart. You see the result in a bakery window, golden layers stacked like pages in a very edible book. Bite into one, and the sound is crisp, delicate, almost whispering. Flakes fall onto your fingers. The smell is toasted, creamy, and slightly sweet. It is engineering disguised as comfort. You step into a French bakery before sunrise. The atmosphere is warm and flowery, with ovens breathing heat into the room. Bakers move in quiet concentration, their clothes dusted white, their hands quick and practiced. A rolling pin thumps gently. Trays slide against metal racks. Butter waits in chilled sheets, pale and firm, then disappears into dough through folding, turning, resting, and folding again. There is no hurry, only discipline. Croissant may look carefree on a plate, but it is the result of cold control, measured pressure, and a deep suspicion of warmth arriving too soon. In such places, butter becomes identity. Normandy and Brittany are imagined through salted butter, cream, sea air, cattle, rain, and pastries that seem morally opposed to restraint. A simple salted butter caramel can taste like a coastline sweet, briny, soft, and slightly wild. You hold one on your tongue and feel it dissolve slowly, leaving salt at the edge, sugar deep in the centre, and dairy warmth spreading like a low lamp. National and regional identities often gather around these tastes, not because every person eats the same thing every day, but because foods become symbols. They say, this is our landscape, this is our weather, this is what home tastes like when memory is being generous. You cross into a restaurant kitchen where butter is less cosy and more theatrical. Pans flash over flames. Wine hisses as it hits hot metal. Shallots soften. A cook lowers cubes of cold butter into a sauce and whisks with quick, circular strokes. The sauce thickens, glosses, and becomes smooth enough to reflect the light. Butter can emulsify, enrich, and finish sauces, giving them body and shine. A cook may call it mounting with butter, which sounds like a noble ceremony for a very small cube of fat. You watch the sauce come together, and it feels almost unfair. Water, acid, heat, and fat should not be so harmonious. And yet there they are, behaving beautifully because someone knows the timing. Food historians and chefs still debate whether butter's role in haute cuisine should be seen as a marker of refinement, a regional inheritance, or a technical tool that later became wrapped in prestige. The uncertainty matters because butter is both ingredient and symbol. In one hand, it is chemistry fat, water, milk solids, melting point, flavour compounds. In the other, it is cultural theatre, white tablecloths, careful sauces, pastry carts, and menus that make dinner sound like a diplomatic event. Butter does not choose one meaning. It sits calmly in all of them, looking innocent. Now you enter a different kind of room, a family kitchen on a cold evening. The light is yellow. A radio murmurs. Rain ticks softly against the glass. Someone stirs mashed potatoes, and someone else cuts butter into them in thick pieces that vanish under the spoon. Steam rises, carrying the smell of earth, salt, milk, and warmth. You lean close and feel damp heat on your face. The potatoes change texture, becoming smooth and plush. This is comfort food in its simplest form, a dish made not only to feed you, but to reassure you that the day is allowed to end. Butter belongs easily to childhood memory. It melts into pancakes. It pools in the centre of rice. It glazes corn. It softens noodles. It enriches scrambled eggs. It sits on a baked potato and slides slowly down the split side like a tiny golden avalanche with excellent public relations. The sounds are ordinary and intimate, a knife tapping a plate, butter sizzling in a skillet, a spoon scraping the last glossy streak from a bowl. These sounds do not enter official anthems, but they may be closer to how people actually remember belonging. In Scandinavia, butter stands beside rye breads, crisp breads, potatoes, fish, and baked goods, tied to dairy landscapes and winter tables. In Ireland, it carries memories of pasture, rain, soda bread, and farmhouse kitchens. In the United States, it appears in biscuits, pie crusts, buttered popcorn, corn on the cob, and Thanksgiving mashed potatoes. In Poland, Germany, Austria, and beyond, it slips into cakes, dumplings, cookies, and holiday breads. In India, ghee enters sweets, rice, breads, and festival foods, bringing aroma and richness with a different texture and keeping quality. These are not identical traditions. Butter does not make the world uniform. It becomes local wherever it lands. A quirky tidbit hides in butter sculpture. In parts of North America, especially at state fairs, artists have carved butter into cows, princesses, famous people, and entire display scenes kept cold behind glass. It is ridiculous and impressive at the same time, which is a powerful combination. You stand before a life-size butter cow and feel the chill from the refrigerated case on your face. Children press close. Adults pretend they are only mildly interested. Everyone knows it is absurd. Everyone looks anyway. The sculpture says something tender and funny about dairy pride. This food is so central that people will turn it into art, livestock, celebrity, and spectacle. Provided the air conditioning behaves, butter can also divide taste. Some prefer salted, others unsalted. Some want cultured butter with tang and depth. Others want sweet cream butter, clean and mild. Some spread it thick enough to leave tooth marks. Others use a whisper so thin it is almost a rumour. In many households, These preferences become part of personality. There is always someone who leaves crumbs in the butter, a crime so small and yet so emotionally rich that it deserves its own minor court system. You sit at a holiday table, the room is crowded, warm and slightly too loud. Chairs scrape, glasses clink. Someone laughs in the kitchen. Butter appears shaped in a dish, maybe curled, moulded, softened, or simply set out in a practical block because elegance is lost to the schedule. It passes from hand to hand with rolls, bread, potatoes, vegetables, or pancakes. The butter dish is small, but its movement connects people. Please pass the butter as a tiny phrase of civilization. It asks for attention, offers cooperation, and occasionally reveals who is ignoring whom. In restaurants, butter arrives before the meal like a promise. A server places bread on the table, and beside it, butter perhaps whipped, salted, cultured, browned, herbed, smoked, or shaped into a perfect quenelle that seems almost too composed for its destiny. You touch it with a knife and feel air folded into fat. Spread onto warm bread, it melts instantly. Conversation slows. For a moment, no one needs the main course. Butter has done what hospitality often tries to do, make a stranger's table feel welcoming. Brown butter brings another kind of magic. You drop butter into a pan and listen as it foams, crackles, and quiets. Water cooks off. Milk solids sink and toast. The smell turns nutty, deep, almost like hazelnut and warm biscuits. The colour shifts from yellow to amber to brown. There is danger here, because a few seconds too long can turn charm into regret. You watch carefully, breathing in the rich scent. Brown butter can transform pasta, fish, cakes, vegetables, and sauces. It is butter showing its darker voice, still gentle, but more complex, like a bedtime storyteller who knows a few secrets and only shares the safe ones. Butter's emotional weight comes partly from scarcity and partly from generosity. A thick spread says there is enough. A glossy finish on a dish says someone took care. A pastry rich with butter says time was spent in communities shaped by poverty, rationing, migration, or hard labour. Butter can become a memory of treats, feast days, recovery, or prosperity. In affluent settings, it may become artisanal, branded, cultured, grass-fed, hand-churned, or described in language that makes a dairy cow sound like a poet in a meadow. The same food can be humble or luxurious depending on who is holding the knife. Late at night, the kitchen grows quiet. The festival table is cleared, the bakery ovens cool, the restaurant pans are washed and hung. In a small dish, a little butter remains, marked by the path of a knife. It has served pastry, sauce, bread, memory, identity, and comfort without needing to announce itself. You touch the dish and feel the faint chill returning to its surface. Outside, the world may argue about nations, borders, recipes, authenticity, and who makes the best version of anything. Inside, butter softens near warmth, melts into food, and reminds you that belonging is often built from small, repeatable gestures, one spread piece of bread at a time. You stand in a modern kitchen at the quiet edge of evening, where the refrigerator hums softly and the outside world presses its blue face against the window. The room is familiar, almost too familiar to notice. A glass jar of jam waits on the shelf. A loaf of bread sits in a paper bag. The butter rests in a covered dish, pale yellow, cool and patient, carrying 10,000 years of animal breath, human hands, trade, faith, argument, hunger, invention, and taste into one small rectangle. You lift the lid. It gives a faint ceramic click. The butter smells clean, creamy, and grassy, with a sweetness that feels almost hidden. Your finger touches the edge and finds it firm at first, then slightly yielding, already answering the warmth of the room. This is the strange power of ordinary food. It seems simple only because civilization has done so much work to make it appear that way. Somewhere far from this kitchen, cows graze or feed in barns, milk is collected, chilled, tested, transported, separated, churned, washed, salted, shaped, wrapped, shipped, shelved, bought, carried home, and placed here as if it had merely arrived by magic and good manners. A mainstream historical fact belongs to this present moment: butter. Today is produced through carefully controlled dairy systems that often include cream separation or pasteurization, churning, moisture control, salting, packaging, refrigeration, and food safety testing. These processes help make butter consistent and widely available. The small block in your dish is not just a farm product. It is an agricultural product, a scientific product, an industrial product, and still, somehow, a deeply personal one. You may use it without ceremony, yet it has passed through more hands, machines, standards, and decisions than most royal meals of the distant past. You spread it on warm bread, the sound is quiet, a soft scrape, then a hush as the butter melts into the surface. Steam rises faintly. The smell changes at once, becoming rounder, warmer, more inviting. The bread grows glossy where the butter sinks in. You take a bite, and for a moment the enormous history behind it disappears into pleasure. That is what food does so well. It hides complexity inside comfort. It lets empires, chemistry, pasture, labour, and memory become breakfast. Yet the present is not simple. Butter has become part of conversations about health, environment, animal welfare, farming methods, and climate. Dairy farming requires land, water, feed, energy, and careful management of waste. Cattle produce methane, a greenhouse gas that matters in climate discussions. Butter, because it is concentrated from cream, carries a larger environmental footprint than many less concentrated foods. This does not turn a pat of butter into a villain twirling a tiny moustache on your toast. History is rarely that tidy, but it does remind you that every comfort has a landscape behind it. You walk in imagination through a dairy farm at dusk. The atmosphere is damp and cool. A milking parlour pulses with mechanical rhythm, soft suction, metal clinks, water rinsing through lines, hooves shifting on rubber mats. The air smells of hay, silage, disinfectant, warm milk, and animals breathing slowly. A worker checks equipment with practiced movements. A cow flicks her tail, unimpressed by global food systems. Outside, swallows cut across a fading sky. This is not a pastoral postcard, nor is it only an industrial scene. It is labour, biology, economics, weather, and care held together by routine. Scholars still debate how best to measure butter's true cost across nutrition, culture, animal agriculture, greenhouse emissions, rural livelihoods, and consumer choice. A life cycle calculation can measure energy, land, emissions, and water. It cannot easily measure a grandmother's pastry, a festival sweet, a family farm, a local creamery, or the feeling of bread passed across a table. That does not mean feeling cancels measurement. It means the story is layered. Numbers matter. Memory matters. Livelihood matters. So does the future that children will inherit, with or without extra butter on their pancakes. In a grocery store, the butter shelf has become a small museum of modern desire. Salted, unsalted, cultured, European-style, grass-fed, organic, whipped, spreadable, clarified, goat butter, plant-based alternatives sitting nearby with their own confident packaging. Labels promise purity, softness, tradition, climate awareness, animal care, higher fat content, better baking, richer flavour, easier spreading. You stand under bright lights, hand resting on the cold door handle, feeling the refrigerated air spill across your knuckles. The hum of compressors blends with distant carts, a child asking for cereal, and someone comparing prices with the seriousness of a diplomat. Choice can feel like abundance. It can also feel like homework. One butter offers tradition, another offers lower price, another offers a farm name, another has a certification, another looks charming but costs enough to make your wallet cough politely. Modern food often asks ordinary shoppers to become part-time ethicists, nutritionists, economists, and flavour judges while standing in aisle 7. It is impressive and mildly unfair. A quirky tidbit glimmers in the world of preserved ancient butter and luxury modern butter. Some archaeological finds from peat bogs have remained waxy and recognisable for astonishing lengths of time, while today certain chefs age cultured butter like cheese, encouraging deeper flavours under controlled conditions. The ancient bog and the modern tasting menu are not the same thing, of course, but they share a delightful idea. Butter can have a time inside it. A fresh pat tastes of morning. An aged butter may taste nutty, sharp, almost cheesy. A buried lump from long ago tastes mostly like a question nobody should casually sample. Please let archaeology keep its snacks. You return to the kitchen and place a pan on low heat. Butter lands inside with a soft knock, then begins to slide. It melts from the edges inward, a yellow pool forming beneath a shrinking island. Tiny bubbles appear. The sound is intimate, a whisper, a fizz, a gentle crackle as water escapes. The smell turns warm and deep. You lower the heat and watch closely. Milk solids drift downward. The surface foams, then clears. Even now, in a kitchen full of appliances and electric light, butter performs an old transformation. Solid becomes liquid. Pale becomes gold. Simple becomes fragrant. There is science in this small pan. Butter is an emulsion of fat, water, and milk solids. It behaves differently from pure oil because it contains that hidden water and those flavourful proteins and sugars. It can brown, it can burn, it can lift pastry, it can carry aromas, it can make sauces glossy or cookies tender. Cooks know this not only from books, but from the wrist and nose. Too cold, and pastry cracks. Too warm, and layers collapse. Too much heat, and brown becomes black. Butter still teaches through attention. You pour the melted butter over vegetables, rice, noodles, or a piece of fish. The smell rises, soft and complete. The dish changes colour, texture, and mood. That is the everyday miracle. Butter rarely builds a meal alone. It joins, finishes, carries, rounds, and comforts. It is a supporting actor with suspiciously excellent timing. Nostalgia gathers near it easily. A butter dish on a table may recall a farmhouse, a bakery, a holiday, a school lunch, a late-night snack, a first apartment, or a person who always softened the butter properly because they had standards. You may remember toast cut into triangles, corn at a summer table, pancakes on a sleepy weekend, or a biscuit split open while steam rises through the centre. The memories may be small, but small memories are often the ones that stay. They do not demand attention. They wait, like butter under a lid, until warmth returns. Now the kitchen grows quieter. The pan is washed. The bread bag is folded closed. The refrigerator opens with a soft suction, and the butter dish returns to its cool shelf. The light inside glows briefly on jars, greens, leftovers, and the little covered dish, then disappears as the door shuts. The hum resumes. Outside, night settles over roofs, roads, fields, shops, barns, ports, and kitchens where other people are doing the same small things, spreading, melting, measuring, saving, choosing. You sit with one last piece of warm bread. The butter has vanished into it, leaving only shine, scent, and softness. That is a peaceful ending for such a powerful food. It does not need to remain visible to matter. It has powered bodies, marked status, fed rituals, crossed seas, built industries, stirred laws, comforted families, and entered debates that will continue around climate, health, craft, and care. Yet in your hand it is only bread made tender. The room dims, sounds loosen and drift apart. The refrigerator becomes a low, steady note. A spoon rests beside the sink. The plate warms your lap, then cools. You breathe in the last creamy trace of melted butter, mixed with toast, night air, and the faint, clean scent of a quiet kitchen. Your shoulders lower, your hands grow still. Outside, the dark fields of the world seem wide and calm, with cattle breathing somewhere beneath stars, grass bending under dew, and lamps glowing in distant windows. Butter has travelled through ages to arrive at this hush, this simple table, this final soft taste. Let the golden thread fade gently now into warmth, into memory, into sleep,